Material Man, The Disappearance of Jim Thompson, 1967. Jim Thompson was ready for a holiday in the Cameron Highlands of Malaysia. He had come a long way since his childhood in Greenville, Delaware. James Harrison Wilson Jim Thompson was born March 21, 1906, the youngest of 5 children. His maternal grandfather, James Harrison Wilson, became an Army Major General at the age of 27. His father was president of the United States Finishing Company, which printed cottons in mass production. From 1931 to 1940, Thompson was a practicing architect, but he failed to pass the New York Architectural Board exams. Please subscribe my channel. Thompson joined the U.S. Army at the beginning of World War II. At the urging of Captain Edwin Black, he became a member of the newly formed Office of Strategic Services, a forerunner of the Central Intelligence Agency. In 1945, he began training for several weeks in the jungles of what is now Sri Lanka to prepare for the liberation of Thailand from Japanese control. As he and his comrades were flying to Thailand, word reached them that Japan had surrendered. The plane continued on to Bangkok, however, where Thompson took on the role of OSS station chief. He also set up a temporary American consulate until a permanent one could be established. After being discharged from the Army in 1946, he decided to stay in Thailand because he had fallen in love with the country and its people. It was not long before Thompson discovered his true calling in life. The northeast region of Thailand produced some raw silk, but competition from cheaper, machine-made fabrics produced in Europe and Japan had significantly diminished the demand for Thailand's raw silk. Thompson saw potential in the tiny industry, which was on the verge of extinction. He showed samples to designers, decorators, and fashion editors in New York. They raved about the product. Then he hired 200 silk weavers in Thailand to create finished products from raw silk and dyes. The brightly colored, hand-woven silk gained popularity, and silk shops began springing up around Bangkok. By 1965 there were 156. The growing Thai silk industry began garnering international attention and media coverage in Reader's Digest, Time, Life, Newsweek, and the New York Times. Fashion designers such as Balmain also began using the material. The cast of the musical The King and I wore Thai silk that Thompson had developed. By 1958, the industry had expanded to the point that Thompson's Thai Silk Company was selling its products to more than 17 countries. Sales had grown from $36,000 in 1948 to $650,000 in 1957. By 1967, national and international sales had grown to $1.5 million. The number of Thais earning their living from silk weaving rose from a few in 1945 to 20,000 by 1967. Along the way, Thompson became known as the Thai Silk King, and by then he had also assembled an enviable art collection and built a home that still stands today as a landmark in Bangkok. He seamlessly wove together 6 traditional Thai teak houses into one, placing them on stilts to protect his home from storms and flooding. He was a soft-spoken man of medium height, with blue eyes, and he was a heavy smoker. He worked hard for his success, waking up early to visit silk weavers and often not getting to sleep until 11 p.m. or midnight. This eligible bachelor's personal fortune was estimated to be worth about $1 million. The first few months of 1967 were particularly busy for Thompson. On March 17, 1967, the new 2-story building that was to house his silk business in Bangkok finally had its grand opening. A few days later, Thompson celebrated his 61st birthday with friends on March 21 before packing his bags and boarding a flight to Malaysia on March 23. He had accepted an invitation from friends Dr. T.G. and Helen Ling to visit the Cameron Highlands. This pretty resort area was located more than 5,000 feet above sea level and about 140 miles north of Kuala Lumpur. It was surrounded by wild jungle terrain and deep, hidden ravines. The Lings lived in Singapore. Dr. Ling was Chinese, and his American wife ran her own antique store. It would be a short visit, however. On Easter Monday, Thompson was planning to go to Singapore to attend business meetings with an American businessman who was considering starting up a fabric industry there and was seeking advice. He was to dine with the businessman and the American ambassador in the evening. Thompson was traveling to the Cameron Highlands with Connie Mangskaw, a half-English, half-Thai friend whom he had met in 1945 when he worked for the army, and she was an interpreter for Allied forces. When they arrived at Bangkok airport to fly to Penang, Thompson realized that he had failed to get his cholera shot, which was required to enter Malaysia. He also had not brought a Thai tax clearance certificate. A health official at the airport agreed to give him the cholera shot and backdate the certificate to meet Malaysia's 6-day requirement. For her part, Mangskaw signed a form promising to pay any outstanding taxes that Thompson owed should he fail to return home from the trip. When Thompson and Mangskaw arrived in Penang, they stayed overnight in Georgetown, the island's main city. The day of their arrival, they checked into the Ambassador Hotel and had a taxi take them on a sightseeing tour around the island. They returned to the hotel afterwards in time for Thompson to get a haircut, another task that he had neglected to do in the busy months leading up to this trip. Thompson and his traveling companion met for cocktails, went out for supper at an Indian restaurant, and went for a walk. The following morning they went shopping. The taxi that they had hired to drive them to the Highlands picked them up just after 11 a.m. On their way to take the ferry to the mainland, the taxi driver stopped his vehicle and jumped out without warning his passengers. He ran into a nearby building and emerged 5 minutes later with another man who, he explained, would be their driver. The unexpected stop was a minor inconvenience that Thompson and Mangskaw tolerated. When they reached the town of Tapa, their driver asked them to change taxis. The road climbed steeply to the resort, and he said that his car had developed engine trouble and would not be able to make the steep climb. Mangskaw complained when she realized that the second taxi already had 2 Chinese passengers inside. She and Thompson had paid for a private car, not a shared taxi that would be cramped with 5 people. The driver of the second taxi agreed. The other passengers removed their bags and Mangskaw and Thompson completed their trip. They arrived at the Ling's Moonlight Cottage at about 5:30 p.m. on Good Friday. The cottage was a semi-Tudor bungalow that sat on a hill surrounded by thick jungle. A covered veranda just off the living room had a gravel path that led along the lawn and down a narrow, twisting road to a golf course. The 3-bedroom house had a large garden around 3 sides. It was in Tanah Rata, which had more of an English than a Malaysian feel to it. The town had neat bungalows, hotels, a golf course, and an Anglican church carved from the jungle. Dr. Ling was waiting for Thompson and Mangskaw. His wife arrived several hours later, after completing some business that had delayed her. Thompson woke up the next morning feeling well rested. After breakfast, he and Dr. Ling decided to try a new trail that led to the golf course. They agreed to meet the women at the club at 11 a.m. When Mangskaw and Mrs. Ling arrived at the appointed hour, however, the men were nowhere to be found. Soon after Dr. Ling and Thompson had begun walking along the trail, they got lost amid the tangled brush coming down the hill. Dr. Ling then tripped on a root and injured himself. They found their way to the golf course just before 1 p.m. after Thompson discovered a small stream and they followed it until they reached a familiar spot. After having a drink at the club, the foursome drove home for lunch. On Easter Sunday, March 26, 1967, Thompson decided to walk down to the bottom of the hill from the cottage as the others prepared to attend services at the Anglican Church in Tanah Rata. He met the rest of the group near the golf course about 15 minutes later. When the church service ended, they all went back to the Moonlight Cottage to pick up a picnic basket. Then they headed to a site at Mount Brinchang about 45 minutes away, spread a blanket on the grass, and ate from the hamper and thermos. But Thompson appeared to be in a hurry. As soon as they had finished eating, he started putting things back in the picnic hamper. Everyone returned to the cottage at about 2:30 p.m. and went to their respective rooms for a nap. As Mangskaw and the Lings went off to their rooms, Thompson stayed in the living room. The Lings left their bedroom window open to allow air to circulate. They heard their restless houseguest move an aluminum deck chair onto the veranda. Just after 3 p.m. they heard footsteps crunching on the gravel leading down the path to the road. They assumed that Thompson was taking a walk. When Mangska emerged from her room at 4:30 p.m., Dr. Ling was reading in the living room and Thompson's suit jacket was slung over the back of a chair on the veranda. Strangely, he had left his cigarettes and lighter behind as well as the medication that he took to deal with pain from gallstone attacks. Everyone assumed that Thompson would be back shortly. Tea was served at 5 p.m. There was still no sign of him by 6 p.m. Dr. Ling wondered if he had walked down to the golf course, so he drove over there to check. Dr. Ling returned alone 15 minutes later. Thompson was not there and nobody had seen him there or on the road that afternoon. The jungle in the highlands was difficult enough to navigate by day. When darkness fell, the sky turned into an inky black and the temperature dropped noticeably. By 7:30 p.m. that Easter Sunday, the Lings and Mangska were worried. Friends that they called had neither seen nor heard from Thompson. Dr. Ling reported Thompson's disappearance to the police in Tanarata. They said that there was little they could do until sunrise. They would launch a full-scale search in the morning if he hadn't returned. The Lings speculated that perhaps Thompson had stumbled and lost his bearings in the darkness or injured himself. A friend and British Army major whose Cocker Spaniel had some training for hunting arrived to help. They first walked to a hornet's nest that Thompson was known to have gone to see twice. It was a 45-minute walk in daylight but took much longer under the cover of darkness. The searchers returned at midnight, having found no trace of Thompson. After having a rest, the two men went out and searched for several hours in a different direction. The local police launched an official search about 15 hours after Thompson was last seen. By the end of the first day, nearly 100 people were involved in looking for the Thai Silk King, including the local police, a group of British soldiers on leave in the Highlands, and guests from local hotels. Everyone was aware that the first day was crucial for finding Thompson and maximizing his safety, but the tangled jungle terrain and the fact that no one knew in which direction Thompson had gone made the situation more difficult. Searchers kept their eyes peeled for signs that someone had used the trails, such as flattened grass, broken branches, or bits of clothing. In an effort to retrace Thompson's steps and establish his movements, police asked villagers if anyone had seen the missing man around 3:30 p.m. on Easter Sunday. A Malay cook in a Lutheran mission cottage near Moonlight Cottage said that she was in the mission's kitchen at about 4 p.m. when she saw a man resembling Thompson walk up the road, look at the garden, and retrace his steps. By Tuesday, the search had expanded to include more than 300 policemen, about 30 Aboriginal guides who lived in the jungle and knew its trails well, soldiers, hotel guests who helped the first day, and pupils from the Dalat American School for Children of American missionaries from throughout Southeast Asia. In all, more than 400 people participated in the search. Due to the efforts of some of Thompson's influential friends, several helicopters were sent to help look for him during the first week. Their usefulness was limited, however, as the thick jungle often prevented crews from seeing the ground. On the second day of the search, a man who was a well-known Bomo, witch doctor, arrived and offered to use his powers to help. Almost every village has a Bomo who can be consulted on a range of problems from impotency to missing persons. While the man was in a trance, he announced that some evil spirits were holding Thompson in the jungle. The next day the Bomo said that Thompson was alive and well and being held under a tree. He pinpointed the spot on a map. The searchers went to look, but found no sign of Thompson. Undeterred, the Bomo claimed that the spirits had moved him and he would return on his own by 9 a.m. the following morning. Wednesday came and went with no sign of the missing man. Searchers initially thought that Thompson was lost or injured and that they would find clues to his whereabouts the first day after he had vanished. When they did not, a new theory emerged by Wednesday or Thursday. Perhaps he had been kidnapped for ransom. This practice was fairly common at the time in Malaysia, particularly with victims who were Singapore Chinese. However, Europeans were not generally kidnapped. After the third day, searchers found no evidence that Thompson had gone into the jungle. Police concluded after 5 days that there was little hope Thompson was still alive, if he was, indeed, in the jungle. Then a new lead emerged. A garage attendant claimed that on the day Thompson disappeared, he had seen a convoy of 5 cars bearing Thai license plates driving up the road to the Highlands at 3:30 p.m. They returned at about 5:30 p.m., he said. This led to speculation that they were involved in Thompson's disappearance. After investigating the story, the Malaysian Criminal Intelligence Division, CID, concluded that the story never happened. According to border authorities, no Thai vehicles entered the country. The Malaysian CID next turned its attention to Mangskaw's story about her and Thompson switching drivers on the way to the Highlands. Had this been a foiled attempt to kidnap the Thai Silk King? Officials learned that the first driver did not have a Malaysian license, so he found a friend who did. As for the second change, drivers coming from Penang often transferred passengers at Tapa to save on gas as well as wear and tear on their car. What may have appeared to be an unusual situation was, in fact, a common practice. On the second day of the search for Thompson, his company announced plans to offer a reward of $10,000 for information leading to his whereabouts. Over the following weeks, his friends increased the amount to $25,000, including $10,000 for proof of his death if he had come to an untimely end. The Lings were subsequently subjected to hoaxes by people who were trying to extort money. The day after the initial reward was posted, a man phoned Dr. Ling at his Singapore apartment and said that he had information about Thompson. He told Ling that Thompson was being held in a house near Tapa. If Ling came with him, they could arrange for a ransom, but the gentleman said that he needed money to get there. Ling gave him $50 Malaysian and said that two friends would meet him instead. The man failed to show up at the appointed time and place. More Bomos came to visit Moonlight Cottage, but the areas that they suggested for Thompson's location were searched to no avail. Police called off the search after 10 days and after having tried to locate Thompson within a 70-mile area of the cottage where he was last seen. But small groups of police went into the jungle whenever new leads arose. Local authorities estimated that it would take a full regiment of men working for about a month to comb the area. Desperate for leads on her brother's whereabouts, Thompson's sister hired Dutch-born mystic Peter Herkos. He sat on the veranda of Moonlight Cottage and claimed that Thompson had been kidnapped by 14 men and brought to Cambodia for political motives. Richard Noon was a British officer working with the Southeast Asia Treaty Organization, SEATO, as a planning officer. He had developed contacts among local Aboriginal people after searching years earlier for information about the fate of his late brother Pat. Noon was brought into the investigation as a more credible source to help with the search. He walked into the jungle and, after speaking with Aboriginal people, emerged 36 hours later. He said that he was convinced Thompson was not in the jungle. As time marched on without any trace of Thompson, the theories about his disappearance grew from the mundane to the outlandish. It was initially believed that he had been the victim of an accident or was lost in the jungle. Then people began to suggest that he had been kidnapped for ransom. Another theory suggested that a tiger had eaten him, but no remains were ever found. Then came conspiracy theorists, who suggested that the former intelligence officer had been kidnapped as part of a political plot, perhaps by communist guerrillas. However, no one ever stepped forward to claim what was considered to be a sizable reward at the time. In 1974, Thompson was officially declared dead. All that remains of the man who revived Thailand's silk industry in the 1950s is his Bangkok home that lives on as a museum. If you enjoy my channel, please subscribe it.